Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle. This is part 22, and we will be reading chapter 7 today, titled Clues from a Shifting Paradigm. And we will be also covering photographs from last chapter that's at the end of chapter 6. So, hope you're all doing well out there. Don't forget to leave a like. Please share this around if you can. If you have anybody else that's interested in this content, it will help the channel. And I thank you very much. So first things first, we got to get this section of the photographs all squared away. All right. So we covered a lot last time. I actually piqued interest on the other platforms that I put this on. Brighteon, especially, as well as BitChute. Maybe the title of the chapter piqued some interest, but Space-Time Vortices, Zero Point, and Sunken Worlds was last week's chapter. So I thank you all for your continued interest in this. But we have some photographs to show, which is in regards to last week's chapter. Just because we would have ran over 2 hours, like a lot over. So we're doing this now. So we have a cluster of photographs here on the first page. And it regards Bimini. It says infrared satellite photo showing Miami and southern Florida on the left and Bimini Island toward the center. Within this short distance of 50 miles, countless ships and planes have vanished. And the photos provided by NASA, so take that for what you will. And these are all black and white in this book, so can't really do anything about that. But you see, this is Bimini. Above that, to the right side, it says the drop-off, quote-unquote, into the tongue of the ocean. So we'll take a look at that. And then below the first image, it says a closer view of Bimini. The drop-off of the Great Bahama Bank shows clearly the, quote, white waters, end quote, south of Bimini are the currents breaking in the lee of Moselle Reef. Bimini remains a hotbed of mysterious disappearances, strange lights, and unexplained electromagnetic anomalies. And the photo, again, is provided by NASA. Hey, Brent, good to see you here. Glad you can join us. So we're just going over the photos from last week's chapter 6. There we go. So that's Bimini. So next photo says an upstanding wheel from the undercarriage of an aircraft at Bimini, showing how shallow the waters are off Bimini and on the Great Bahama Bank in general. And this photo is courtesy of Bruce Burgess. So they were saying it was something like no more than 20 feet. I know it was less than that. I can't recall at this point in time. Next photo we have is, the caption reads, "Far from land, the mysterious bulb of the tongue of the ocean, the surrounding rippled bottom sands are only a few fathoms deep, while the dark blue, as seen black here, of the tongue is 6,000 feet. The dark color upper left is the Exuma Sound, another area of deep water. Along here, at the edge of its drop-off, runs the Exuma chain of islands." So this is again another shallow point in the ocean. With the dark blue being 6,000 feet deep. Next photo we have, the Sapona looks today as she did when Flight 19 used her for bombing practice in 1945, wrecked near Chicken and Hen Shoals in a 1929 storm. She is in 12 feet of water and rises 25 feet above. And this photo is also courtesy of Bruce Burgess. Next, we have examples of the Bimini stones. And this is from the author's collection, so Gian J. Quasar. Then next we have, there is evidence that Bimini was a much larger island only 500 years ago, and that the Spanish knew about the stones. A cartographer drew them on an island in the Bahamas group, which is located in the upper left of this next map. And this is the Piri Reis map of 1513. Weather changes in the last 1,000 years can account for the stone's re-emergence and then resubmergence. And it's from the Library of Congress. So it would be that little cluster there. And then it says here, in this enlargement of the photo at the left, the center of the island is marked by a row of fallen polygonal stones and a stone construction indicating they were on land in 1513. Doing my best to get this to get into focus here. There we go. Next we have effects somewhat reminiscent of Edgar Cayce's prophecies are now being produced from free energy sources in electromagnetism. One of the pioneers is Canadian scientist John Hutchinson. Shown here are shattered ingots. So these are ingots of metal that just, when put under this device that Hutchinson had, or Hutchison, he turned this basically into putty and broke apart as such. Next photograph caption reads, levitating a 60-pound cannonball. And these photos are courtesy of John Hutchison. It's the previous one and this one. And there's video of this as well, which we may cover here eventually. Next photograph, caption reads, Hutchison at the controls. And the good thing about Hutchison is a lot of his material is documented. Next we have fusion of dissimilar materials, a block of wood, and a metal bar. So that was focused on the top image, not the second one I showed. The ones that looks like something pulled apart. This has two views of the cold melting of metal. These are just some of the astounding effects produced by Hutchison. So that's what this one was. Cold melting of metal. The next photograph is Hutchison working on batteries that may run forever. The next 6 photos are 6 views of John Hutchison's lab and various machines that together generate the Hutchison effect. Now, from what I understand, this was all like decommissioned military equipment that he had, that he picked up at auctions. That's my understanding of how he got his hands on this technology. It was bits and pieces of it, and then it eventually turned into all that. Like, he put it all together to make this. So there was work on his end that was done that made this all come together. Next 3 photos, caption reads, an astounding photo of the, quote, whitewaters, end quote, taken by Bruce and Lynn Gernon on April 26, 1999, off Andros Island. The area is almost exactly where the lenticular cloud developed and turned into a ringed donut cloud. This picture shows a remarkable vortex of clear water in the middle of the glowing waters. Another is in the upper left without any vortex action. Taken from 6,500 feet. Cloud tops at 3,500 feet. Gernon estimates each blotch covered 10 acres. And these photos are courtesy of Bruce and Lynn Gernon. So it's the vortex of white water. Alright, we got 2 pages of photographs left. So next is ball lightning in formation over Bimini. This photo's courtesy of Bruce Gernon. Doing my best to have this focus. I'm using, I got the best webcam at the time. I must have gotten this like 7 years ago now. But you'd figure it would autofocus a little better. There's not much I can do. I apologize about that. I'm trying to stay with each image until we get some proper focus. There we go. Next image is spiraling clouds form corkscrew tails. And this is courtesy of Walter Nemanishin. I don't know. Can you see the tails on the... I wish these were more, like, blown up to each page. I'm sure it wouldn't have cost that much more to print like that. But who knows. Next photograph. Caption reads, "This may be the oldest worked stones in the world. The great foundation stones of the Temple of Baal at Baalbek, Lebanon, are 65 feet long by 14 feet high and wide. And each weighs 1,200 tons. A classical Roman temple was built over them, but no one knows who originally cut and moved them or for what purpose." And this is from the author's collection. Next, the largest worked stone in the world at Baalbek, 68 feet long by 15 feet high and wide. What stopped the building? What toppled these prehistoric buildings? And again, this is from the author's collection. Okay, so there is a person to scale right here. I think there's a YouTube channel called John Leonard Walson, and he actually went on tour of this site, and he has very good videos. Several minutes long a piece, but it's very worth checking out if you want to see more of this site. Next, the caption reads, "At Baalbek, at one side, the Roman temple falls short of the stones." And this is from the author's collection. So they built on top of the giant stones in the foreground near the bottom there. They just built the temple on the Roman temple on top. Next photograph. Baalbek stones from another angle. Some of the stones on top match the style of those at Bimini. And again, this is from the author's collection. So you see what he's trying to get at here. I'm doing my best to have it focus. So my apologies. Some of these take a little long. Next photograph. Is Sacsayhuaman, Peru, terracing up the hill. And this is courtesy of Judith Marks. Again, similar stones like Bimini. Peru, Lebanon. Next is also Sacsayhuaman. Parts of the ancient ramparts are much decayed. And again, this is courtesy of Judith Marks. Next, we have a cluster of 3 photos. It says also Sacsayhuaman. 3 photos showing the beveling and the detail of the intricate joins of the stones. And this is also courtesy of Judith Marks. Alright, in the last 2 pages of photographs before we begin today's chapter. Sacsayhuaman. These stones show more than just a little resemblance to those of Bimini and to the mysterious culture of the Bahama Bank. And again, this photo is courtesy of Judith Marks. Yeah, I'd say very similar. Next, also from Sacsayhuaman. There are miles of such polygonal stones. So miles. And this is also courtesy of Judith Marks. You know how long that would have taken to do with today's technology? Or lack of technology? Next photograph. Sacsayhuaman. Note the modern work with small rocks compared with the perfectly faceted boulders. And this is courtesy of Judith Marks as well. Next, also from Sacsayhuaman, note the detail in just one short section of the wall. And this is also courtesy of Judith Marks. And finally, an interesting compromise. A freestanding church steeple. Actually, it's a relay tower for wireless communications. Its design dictated by the fact that the property of a church was the best area to receive and transmit signals. The tower was modeled on a church steeple to confirm it with the theme of the property, or to conform it with the theme of the property. A similar concept is found in Casey's readings for Past Atlantis. Are we going too far? And this is from the author's collection. Doing my best to get this to focus. Alright. And those are the photographs from Chapter 6. So now we will begin Chapter 7. Titled Clues from a Shifting Paradigm. We'll get the Illuminati up here. Which, again, this navigated the area of Bimini on the stone road that it found on the bottom of the ocean. And that took 35 minutes to go through all those photographs. That's why I kept it for today. And we have 20 pages to read. So let's get to it. Ever since the 1960s, it has been established that gravity anomalies can pinpoint areas of tectonic stresses that are otherwise invisible. This was determined first by gravimetry and then by artificial satellite orbit perturbations. Tracking satellites are so precisely calibrated that even minor variations in the measurement of gravity by as little as plus or minus 0.04 centimeter per second squared will affect the system, and their locations must be previously computed before launching. An overall survey of the gravitational field of the Earth reveals, quote, zones of compression, end quote, areas where continental masses abut and compress against each other, where the continuing force possibly directs crustal mass back into the mantle, creating pressure and density that register in readings of gravity. Zones of tension also exist. Great upward thrusts from deep within the Earth into the crust. The pressure upward supposedly affects gravity in reverse, compared to zones of compression. This is no doubt a partially cyclical process, where the crustal displacement downward at the zones of compression displaces the viscous mantle, which then pushes up into the crust toward the surface at the zones of tension. The layout of these zones draws our attention quite squarely to the Atlantic. The zones of compression are on the side of the continents that face away from the Atlantic, that is, in the areas of the Pacific Ocean where the ocean floor has been buckled by the massive force of the Euro-Asian continent pushing headward against the seafloor. Along the Alpide region, where the Asian subcontinent and Eurasia compress, and on the western sides of Mexico and South America, where the American continental mass has swept so much seafloor before it, it too shows signs of being compressed like a massive carpet. In contrast, the Atlantic seabed has virtually no zones of compression. Zones of tension exist there, following precisely the great undersea mid-Atlantic ridge, where the crust has split open and billions of tons of magma have uplifted the sea bottom by thousands of feet. In some places, the mid-Atlantic ridge has risen to break the surface, and these peaks and seamounts form such distantly placed islands as the Azores in the North Atlantic, off Portugal, to Ascension Island in the South Atlantic, and even down to Tristan da Cunha. Tristan da Cunha, spelled C-U-N-H-A, much further south, roughly parallel with the bottom of the African continent. Underwater mapping of the Atlantic has confirmed that the shape, convolutions, and contours of the mid-Atlantic ridge correspond to continental shelves on both sides of the Atlantic. Echo sounding has also confirmed that its vast inclined slopes directly correspond to the width between the continents. Where the ridge is wide, the distance between the continents is widest, and where the ridge is narrow, at the Romanche Gap, and that's spelled R-O-M-A-N-C-H-E. Could say it's pronounced Romanche. Near the equator, the distance between the continents is the narrowest. All this collectively calls our attention to the theory that there was once one great, quote, megacontinent, end quote, on Earth, which for some still unknown reason fractured, spread apart, and created the present appearance of the Earth, the seafloors, and the ocean currents, and possibly because of weight redistribution, even tilted the Earth on its axis, initiating our seasonal weather patterns. And we have a map diagram here. Its caption reads, "Dark lines trace, quote, zones of compression," end quote, while the dual lines trace, quote, zones of tension, end quote, in the gravitational field of the Earth. They follow geological stresses. So just to clarify, the lighter lines are the dual lines, as you can see. So zones of tension, and the dark lines are the zones of compression. I'm going to take a drink of water. Examples of what kind of truly earth-shaking force must have been mounted to uplift the ridge can be found in more modern, though minuscule by comparison, cataclysms. When only one volcano blew up in 1883 on the island of Krakatoa in the Java Sea, for instance, the shock waves were registered in England 11,000 miles away, and minor tidal waves were also noted in the English Channel. But the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is itself around 10,000 miles long, a network of immense parallel ridges on opposite sides of a central rift valley. In some areas, this central rift is 6 miles wide and as much as 2 miles deep. When considering that this is the feature of much of its length, it gives the impression of being a huge scar that split open and uplifted along almost one entire side of the earth. And again, that's what we're talking about here. A project carried out over the last decade under the guidance of Drs. Deborah K. Smith and Joe Kahn, spelled C-A-A-N, has mapped and confirmed as many as 481 active volcanoes along only a 500-mile segment of the ridge. And keep in mind this ridge is 10,000 miles long. Some ranging as tall as 1,800 feet from the bottom. Extrapolating this, it is estimated that there are 85 million volcanic seamounts on the ocean floor, with 2.5 million ranging over 600 feet high. Of all the oceans, the Atlantic seafloor remains the most unstable part of this planet. Thousands of earthquakes strike along the ridge as bottom plates move and as more magma boils and oozes out along its course. Extending outward from the ridge toward the continental shelves, the bottom is literally peppered with volcanoes in the form of coalesced seamounts. Trembling bottoms cause frictions and rogue waves, and massive lava flows the size of some countries span huge sections of its floor. These seem to be explained by the past movement of the continents over the sea bottom, the changing weight passing overhead having upset the mantle below. All of these have the potential to shift the bottom and butt and compress huge sections of seafloor, potentially affecting both the magnetic and gravitational fields. Even a minuscule shift can change pressure over thousands of square miles of sea bottom. Gravity anomalies are known to exist over land areas, to exist over land around areas of post-glacial uplift, where huge glaciers melted and the land became free of its former weight. Transient gravity anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle might play along the same theme, only in reverse. Past ocean level increases have added additional weight to the continental shelves, and this can affect former coastal faults and strata. Portions of the continental shelf north of the Bahamas seem to have incrementally plunged. From Blake Terrace east of Florida down to Puerto Rico, leaving the vast Great Bahama Bank as a massive plateau awaiting inundation. Upward pressure from the mantle counterbalancing the plunging weight of the shelf might keep sections of the bottom in a touchy, teeter-totter harmony. Tracking satellite glitches, sometimes reported over this area, might be the only evidence for these brief tugs of war. Phases of the moon may even temporarily affect the magnetic field lines if they have been made touchy by a past cataclysm. According to Russian engineer Dr. A.J. Yelkin, some unexplained magnetic deviations recur in the triangle frequently enough to be plotted. These have been at the new moon, full moon, and when the moon is closest to the Earth. And then we have an image here. It says satellite imaging shows the continental shelves of the triangle. East of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, they plunge gradually, possibly all the way down to Puerto Rico, leaving several freestanding banks, like the Great and Little Bahama Banks, on the greater continental shelf. Yelkin deduces that the magnetic deflections at these times are caused by lunar solar tides. This would also explain Dr. David Zink's reports of unexplained magnetic deviations at Bimini each year in early August, a time coinciding with a full moon. Areas of the Bahamas near the deep drop-off are also the only place in the world subject to the phenomenon of the quote glowing end quote or quote white waters end quote, plumes of smoky white water venting up from somewhere in the bottom. They float and disperse with the currents, giving the appearance of wisps of clouds being rippled by the wind. While their source remains mysterious, tests of the water indicate a high sulfur and possibly lithium content, perhaps released by the subsurface instability near these deep underwater cliffs. While it would seem that the unstable nature of the Atlantic would give rise to numerous reports of odd electromagnetic anomalies everywhere, the reason for the Bermuda Triangle's fame may be that it is simply more traveled, and hence mathematical probability dictates a better chance that these anomalies will be encountered there and give rise to comment. It may also mean that the continental shelves and the deep bottoms of the triangle provide more potential for shifts and force field anomalies, whereas the bottoms far from the continental shelves are more static. Vestiges of the Atlantic-centric catastrophe are not only omnipresent on the Atlantic seafloor, they literally girdle the globe. There is ample proof that most of the major mountain ranges and geologic formations in the world were created in response to a cataclysm in the Atlantic. The great mountain ranges of the Earth are all located away from their Atlantic side. That is, for North America, the Sierra Madre, Cascades, and Rockies, which extend through western areas of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. For South America, the Andes along its western half, and for Eurasia and Africa, toward their center or eastern halves, essentially those parts of the continents where buckling would be expected if they were moving away from a central point in the Atlantic. The great earthquake belts also lie on those sides of the continents that would have borne the brunt of the friction as they were pushed away from the Atlantic, like the west coasts of the United States, Mexico, and South America, and the east coasts of Asia and Japan, and the Great Rift Valley on Africa's eastern coast. Gonna pump the volume up a bit here. Hey Ivy, good to see you. Good to see you here. Features exist in every continent to suggest cataclysmic quaking. An inland sea seems suddenly to have emptied into the Gulf of California, creating the Grand Canyon. The Sahara Desert appears to have been very recently an inland sea that drained into the Atlantic. Vast lava beds are pierced through the continents. In the northwest United States, the Columbian Plateau covers 200,000 square miles and is several thousand feet thick. In India, the Deccan Traps is a lava flow the size of France. Since magma does not retain its liquidity very long after reaching the cooler crust, these can only be explained by massive eruptions. Ayers Rock in Australia, that's spelled Ayres, one of the largest boulders in the world, is 1,100 feet high with a 5-mile circumference and seems to have been literally kicked and rolled to its present place in a desert from a mountain 20 miles away. And all of this leads us back to the theory that one great megacontinent was split violently apart at the mid-Atlantic ridge. Just such an event is indelibly etched into the earliest history of mankind. Almost every ancient people preserves vivid accounts of one great earthquake coming just before our first civilization, and that there was the, quote, shaking, shifting, and splitting, end quote, of the whole earth. Sumerian tablets record that the entire earth was divided and mountains were born. The Inca Indians have distinct cultural memories of the Andes mountain range violently uplifting from what had previously been a plain. The Hopi Indians preserve the legend that during this cataclysm, the earth spun off its axis, a remarkable statement showing advanced knowledge by ancient peoples of the shape of the earth and its rotation, and that this, quote, splitting, end quote, so redistributed the weight as to change the incline of the planet. In parentheses, this reads, this ancient view is surprisingly prescient, since many geologists today feel that continental movement can explain the current incline of the Earth on its axis by 23 degrees. Aside from the evidence for sudden climatic changes, glacial melting, and ocean level changes, end parentheses. Among the Teutonic tribes of Norway, there is remarkably similar recollection. Quote, the whole earth trembled. The Yggdrasil tree, and this is spelled Yggdrasil, was shaken from its root to its topmost branches. Mountains crumbled and split from top to bottom. All were driven from their hearth, and the human race was swept from the surface of the earth. The earth itself was losing shape. The stars were coming adrift from the sky and falling into the gaping void. That's actually... Is it saying that the stars are local? Because that's what that sounds like to me. The stars were coming adrift from the sky and falling into the gaping void. Flames spurted from fissures in the rocks. Everywhere there was a hissing of steam. I'm going to reread that. The stars were coming adrift from the sky and falling into the gaping void. Were they seeing the constellations change during this time? Because that would say that the stars are local. Which is what I'm on the train of thought with. And now all the rivers, all the seas arose and overflowed. From every side waves lashed against waves. The earth sank beneath the sea. Mountains rose anew. End quote. A rather accurate account of what would have happened while the continents divided. With mountains building where the land buckled, lands sinking, tidal waves crashing over land and backing up rivers, while the land catastrophically moved to its new position and the earth tilted, as shown by stars apparently moving in the sky and sinking over the horizon. Religious texts as far apart as the Popol Vuh, and that's spelled Popul, second word Vuh, of the Mayans, and the Vedas, spelled Vedas, of India, preserve accounts of the destruction of a great civilization by division, scattering, and confusion, while Genesis records a similar event, Babel, happening just before our own histories begin. Even the isolated Kayapo Indians, and that's spelled Cyapo, of the Amazon, recall that the great corn tree was cut down and mankind was scattered. A recollection, though in impoverished terms, of Genesis and the Tower of Babel. Any explanation for the mysterious ruins in the Bermuda Triangle, along with a search for the unknown civilization that built them, might best begin by probing into the philosophical controversy that buried them more deeply than the sea did. Understanding the shifting interpretation in geology may resurrect them more visibly than the shifting sands of the Bahama banks. The past problem with correlating the mid-Atlantic ridge with this cataclysm and a destruction of civilization was one of timing. Its discovery in 1876 through mapping carried out by HMS Challenger occurred during a revolution in geology brought about by a then new philosophy called uniformitarianism. Yeah, I was gonna say that, but the spelling caught me off guard here. Uniformitarianism. This ideology was based purely on the belief in the uniformity of nature throughout time, and therefore it could not accept that any global cataclysm could have struck the Earth, since, by Victorian standards, none had been observed to do so. Embracing the maxim, quote, "The present is the key to the past," end quote. Uniformitarianism could only come up with ridiculously long ages to accomplish any geological event because every minute change noted today was extrapolated backward to provide a dating method. Thus, all geological formations on Earth, whether canyons, mountains, valleys, or just the general topography, had to be accounted for by contemporary weather patterns, if only given enough time. So that wasn't accounting for giant catastrophic events. Uniformitarianism's philosophical father was Charles Lyell, that's spelled Lyell, an English barrister turned amateur geologist who, after traveling around the globe, began to publish in journals his observations of geologic change. These later culminated in his voluminous book, The Principles of Geology. I'm going to write that down. If you're watching this after the fact, please remember to drop a like. And, share your comments on what we're covering. I'd like to know what you're all thinking. I'm open to discussion here. In 1858, he first introduced the concept to the world with his study of Niagara Falls' 3,500-foot-long gorge, claiming that the falls receded by a foot per year. He extrapolated this backward and applied it to the length of the gorge. His conclusion was that it therefore took 35,000 years for the pounding action of the falls to have created this long canyon. He used this logic on every other feature of geologic activity and came up with phenomenally long ages to accomplish every formation. Yeah, we're not reading that book, because we all know that's not taking into account major catastrophic events. So I'm going to make a note here saying not accurate. And that happens. I'm glad that Gian is covering this here so that we don't have to. For example, the deep layers of sediments, that is, rock created by the swift movement of wind or water, covering the continents, were explained using the present slow buildup of sandstone at river mouths. Since, in some cases, continental sediments are miles deep, it was adduced that roughly 600 million years were required to lay down much of these sediments, since it takes an average of several thousand years for rivers to lay down 10 feet of sandstone. It was also proposed that the fossils of dead animals, parentheses says dinosaurs, mastodons, primates, and parentheses, and foliage found in them were preserved in the same slow way in the course of everyday nature. Well, this is where we got the millions of years bullshit, huh? Because they didn't take into account these major shifts that happened very quickly. That's unfortunate. Lyell and his uniformitarianism organized these strata into neat, quote, time periods, end quote, to classify the developing, quote, ages, end quote, of the Earth. This geologic column became the cyclical dating method for anything found buried in the sediments. Man, you know how inaccurate that must have been? And this method is still being taught today. Foolish. Absolutely foolish. Each time period's duration was determined by its thickness being determined by the repeating type of fossils found vertically throughout it. Each layer represented millions of years since they were hundreds of feet thick. This column should reflect, in neat ascending order, the progressive evolution of species to the present Holocene epoch. And that's spelled Holocene. And in parentheses, this says beginning 10,000 years ago. End parentheses. From the most primitive sea invertebrates of the Cambrian period, parentheses, beginning 600 million years ago, according to uniformitarianism, end parentheses, and contain the sum total of the Earth's geological history. Well, all that goes out the window when we find the hammer that's between these different sedimental layers that are supposed to be many years apart from each other. Like multi-generations apart. And that's putting it lightly. When, quote, continental drift, end quote, became established in the 1960s by apparent measurements of the continents, quote, drifting, end quote, away from the Atlantic by a minuscule 2 centimeters per year, this same theory was used to determine a date for the division. The 2 centimeters was extrapolated backward linearly, much as in Lyell's Niagara Falls computations, and it was determined it would have taken the continents 200 million years to move to their present positions from the mid-Atlantic ridge. The ridge itself had to come about by equally slow means according to the current process of slowly oozing magma, always assuming the maxim, quote, the present is the key to the past, end quote. Before the unusual conceptions of the uniformitarian paradigm rose to dominate geology in the late 19th century, or the 1800s, the catastrophist mentality pervaded. Accepting the ancient and biblical records of a huge global flood having wiped out a prehistoric civilization. And then thousands of years later, another civilization destroyed by scattering and division. Evidence for the first was accepted by the fact that great sheets of sediment, water-laid rock, covered the continents. But for the second, the scope of destruction had been so large, it was not even guessed these ancient accounts like Babel were referring to a global event. In the 16th century, when mapping of the Americas became more extensive, Sir Francis Bacon was the first to note the curious fact that the Americas seemed to fit roughly into the west coast of Africa. However, it was not until 1858 that a French scientist, Antonio Snider Pellegrini, proposed that the Atlantic was created by powerful forces that tore apart one great continent. In the last 25 years, this approach has been solidly embraced by a greater and greater number of geologists, now called neo-catastrophists. Who note that direct field examinations have always refuted uniformitarianism. Lyell's own calculations for the Niagara Falls Gorge were blatantly false. Parentheses, an eminent geologist of the time named Blackwell told Lyell in person that the locals had observed the falls recede by over 3 feet per year. making the falls, by Lyell's own uniformitarian criterion, only around 12,000 years old. End parentheses. Modern studies indicate that the falls actually recede between 3 and 5 feet a year, reducing its age to around 5,000 years. Since about 3/4 of the continents are caked with sediment, it is hard to conceive that ancient rivers or basic wind patterns created them. Even where they are miles deep, they show only depositional action, laid down successively and not disturbed by other events like vast ecosystems, thriving forests, and the like. It's only miles of water-laid rock. These sediments also do not reflect the Lyellian and uniformitarian geologic column. Quote, time periods, end quote, are often discovered out of the chronological order proposed on paper by uniformitarianism. That is, quote, earlier, end quote, time periods, sitting on top of, quote, later, end quote, time periods. This is evident because the fossils entombed in them actually show, quote, later, end quote, developed animals coming long before, quote, earlier, end quote, animals. Such a common paradox is called a deceptive conformity. Deceptive because, in essence, it does not justify uniformitarian ideology, and conformity because the sediments conform to each other perfectly, meaning they were laid down successively without any time lapsing between. In the Grand Canyon, where the geologic column concept is most visible, the entire Permian period is missing. But the sediments sit comfortably on each other. The simple fact is that there are no index fossils here attributed to the Permian period to identify anything as Permian. The fact that fossils universally exist in the Earth's crust underscores the theory of a huge flood. Fossilization would not result if the animal had merely dropped dead, was subsequently eaten or rotted, and was dispersed. The fate of all animals, if they are not buried quickly by a load of sediment, that is water-laid rock, which is required for fossilization to commence. If entire species are missing, it simply indicates that those animals were not indigenous to that area, and therefore it is not surprising that they leave no fossilized trace. The catastrophists note that since animals would be deposited according to variations in weight, time of death, and strength of the currents, there is little reason to expect, quote, chronological order, end quote, in the deposits. Other discoveries support the theory that the strata of the Earth are neither slowly laid down nor particularly ancient, but rather the result of catastrophic floods, or, to use the biblical terminology, the flood. For instance, many fossils actually exist in, quote, graveyards, end quote, around the world, and in particular, the Cumberland Bone Grave of Maryland contains fossils from a wide variety of species, from bats to mastodons, and from several Yissilmissil species. And that word is spelled Yissilmissil, all of which indicates huge volumes of water sweeping over the land. Robert Broom estimates that the Karoo supergroup of Africa, and that's spelled Karoo, contains the fossils of 800 billion vertebrate animals, while the Miocene shales fossil bed of California indicates that 1 billion fish died within a 4 square mile zone. Although according to uniformitarianism, sediments of several feet thick should reflect thousands of years of slow development, it is common to find entire mountains of fossils from Alaska to Africa, indicating spontaneous deaths. Commenting on one as seen in Belgium, paleontologist Dr. Edwin Colbert, possibly the foremost dinosaur expert in the world, has observed, quote, "Thus it could be seen that the fossil boneyard was evidently one of gigantic proportions, especially notable because of its vertical extension through more than 100 feet of rock," end quote. The sudden death is a common sight over the whole globe. Imprints in fossiliferous rock, all that remains after some buried creatures decayed, have revealed the image of a fish half devouring its meal. Another small fish, whose tail is still sticking out of its gaping mouth. Fossils have been unearthed of animals caught while giving birth, or, as in the case of a herd of triceratops discovered by their broken legs and bones, have been overwhelmed by a wall of water while stampeding, no doubt while trying to escape. When Trachodon, a dinosaur discovered in sediment formation in Kansas in 1908, in parentheses, now in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, end parentheses, was unearthed, its impression was largely intact. Its skin shows remarkable detail, including the absence of any significant signs of decomposition or predation by other carnivores and carrion eaters. In August 1971, an expedition unearthed 2 fossilized skeletons in the Gobi Desert. The dinosaurs, Velociraptor and Protoceratops, were still locked in mortal combat, their backs arched, indicating a sudden load of sediment overwhelmed them and froze them in death. One of the largest dinosaurs in the world, Yissilmissil, in parentheses, it's, quote, ground-shaking lizard, end quote, end parentheses, was found sufficiently intact in fossilized form that proteins were still preserved within its bone. Mountains of fossilized animals, as noted above, are so common they have led to some interesting theories on what type and scale of flood hit the Earth. It is speculated that as the floodwaters rose, scores of animals managed to reach the highest hills. As the water levels rose still farther, they were slowly swept away by the swift flood currents and deposited in quickly building sedimentation, individually or where tidal action swept away an entire hill in great heaps. This theory would far better explain the general order of animals noted in the sediments. Sea invertebrates toward the bottom, and land animals and dinosaurs closer to the top, the latter representing the more agile or fierce animals that could make it to the top of the hills and thus be swept away last and deposited higher up in the rapidly building sedimentation. Discoveries of man-made objects buried even deeper in the sediments, here we go, reveal the catastrophic nature and recent date of such a flood and the extent of civilization that was wiped out. A clay doll was found 300 feet down at Nampa, Idaho, while an intricately incised iron square was found in deeply buried coal deposits in Europe. And ancient jewelry or necklaces, has been unearthed in coal deposits in Africa and America, all dated to millions of years ago if assuming uniformitarian sedimentation. However, the fallacy of such an assumption, together with an idea of the volume of the flood and its recentness, can be gleaned from the depth at which human fossilized remains continue to be found and retrieved. The most surprising is a perfectly fossilized human forefinger discovered by Dr. Carl Baugh, and that's spelled Baugh, at the Paluxy River in Texas. The cuticle and nail could be clearly made out, and when sectioned, the ring delineating the bone and the tendon was quite evident. This was found so deep it could only be dated by uniformitarian theory to 70 million years ago, or the Cretaceous period, long before that theory of slow sedimentation allows for any form of man on the earth, much less a perfect human specimen as of today. Hey Zen, good to see you here. It's been a slow night in the live. I guess I'm covering stuff too close to the target tonight, huh? Another example of how recent was such a flood are the detailed descriptions of just such an event contained in the biblical histories of the Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions, as well as in some 500 worldwide legends, many of them remarkably similar. The universality of such stories would seem to rule out local incidents. Many of the mountain tribes have little to fear from floods, and those that have lived near great rivers have been used to the frequent and disastrous overflows of the Nile, Euphrates, and Indus. To exaggerate a seasonal inundation into the legends so dominant of one great flood. Also, since so many peoples have a collective memory of such an event, it would seem that it happened in fairly recent geologic times and truly had global repercussions. In addition, some of the most ancient cultures in the world preserve surprisingly clear and detailed recollections of a far greater amount of water in the atmosphere. I would say that can be termed the vapor canopy. In the Sumerian and Babylonian creation accounts, the firmament is personified by the god Mummu, and that's spelled M-U-M-M-U, who is the rising mist between the great first god Apsu, spelled A-P-S-U, the sweet waters, at Tiamat, the salt waters, and Tiamat, the salt waters, and is eventually divided by Marduk, M-A-R-D-U-K, while in Genesis the same concept is reflected in God dividing the waters above and below with the firmament. It is a fact, however, that only 0.015% of the atmosphere today is made up of water. And if all came down, it would be sufficient to cover the whole earth with less than 2 inches of rain. But ancient worldwide flood stories show a remarkable consistency in the number of days that it rained, an average from 40 to 60 days, and the fact that such phenomenal rain had never been seen before. It was only in the 20th century that some surprising evidence was unearthed, and in parentheses it says literally, and parentheses, that produced startling corroboration of these ancient accounts and therefore links to an antediluvian civilization. Worldwide sedimentary corings have confirmed a vastly different atmosphere existed in the past. Fossilized plants and animals known to thrive only in tropical climates are found globally from Antarctica to Alaska, indicating that the Earth at one time had a largely stable and warm temperature. However, there is currently enough water on the Earth, embodied in the polar ice fields, to flood it completely in such a temperate environment. But the undisputed presence of past continents and thriving terrestrial ecosystems can only mean that much of this water was not on the Earth until recently. I'm going to pause real quick. We have about 11 pages left for today. Many catastrophists, geologists, and geophysicists point to the fact that a vastly greater amount of water in the atmosphere, in parentheses, specifically the troposphere, end parentheses, sufficient to form a water vapor canopy, much like the one Venus, our twin planet, still possesses. And in parentheses it says through carbon trioxide, end parentheses, is the only thing that can explain this. So, more water in the atmosphere to form a vapor canopy. The only other elements that can create a globally warmer Earth would be more ozone or carbon dioxide. But in this case, we are back in the same boat, literally, because this planet would be one vast ocean. Not only would a greater abundance of water in the atmosphere create a greenhouse effect, but the loss of this vapor canopy, for reasons still unknown, would have brought huge amounts of water onto the Earth and caused a great flood. Dr. John Morris, a well-known flood geologist, proposes that the Bible alludes to this scenario from his study of passages dealing with the antediluvian environment. In Genesis 2, verses 5 through 6, it reads that, quote, "The Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, but there went up a mist from the earth, and watered the whole face of the ground." End quote. This precisely is what would have been the case on an Earth with a water vapor canopy. With a steady temperature, there would have been no air mass circulation, and therefore there would have been no rain. The temperature drop at night would have brought down some of the water as dew, and then with the heat of day, it would have risen, watering the vegetation in the process. In the passage dealing with abatement of the flood, further corroborating information was found. It is recorded that a great wind came, something noted perhaps because it was the first time mankind had ever experienced a strong wind. This would indicate that the atmosphere of the Earth had undergone a great change, and the now air mass circulation was possible. And now air mass circulation was possible. With far cooler temperatures, the formation of polar ice and an ice age, quote unquote, was possible, and the waters would recede. So the winds would have made everything cooler and formed frost caps, which became ice caps. If that makes sense. Study of the atmosphere adds an unexpected dimension to all of this, as well as confirming a date for it within the span of intelligent mankind. The isotope carbon-14 should have achieved equilibrium in the atmosphere within 30,000 years. And in parentheses, that is, the amount entering the atmosphere from the Earth is equal to the amount exiting into space, thus causing a steady level in the atmosphere. End parentheses. But repeated and reliable tests have proven that carbon-14 is still building, something that can only be explained by a massive shakeup of the atmosphere within this time frame. Dr. Melvin Cook of the University of Utah undertook a further study of the non-equilibrium factor. He discovered that this non-equilibrium was so significant in carbon-14 dating that it, quote, reduces the computed age by an amount dependent upon the age of the sample, by amounts increasing in time from about 20% in 1,000 years, 30% in 4,000 years, and finally telescoping all of the very long ages to 12,500 years or less. End quote. Though this method brings a plausible global event sufficient to upset the atmosphere closer to the known era of intelligent man, the Earth's magnetic field may help in narrowing this event down to a more precise period. For the last 150 years, the magnetic field has steadily declined by about 6%. Dr. Thomas Barnes of the University of Texas, El Paso, who has devoted much of his life to studying it, explains from the aspect of its decline, its significance. So here's an excerpt from his studies. The consequences of the stronger magnetic field in the past was better shielding of the Earth and its atmosphere from primary cosmic rays. This also reduced the rate of production of carbon-14 in the atmosphere. Primary cosmic rays interact with the atmosphere to produce neutrons, which in turn transmute nitrogen atoms into carbon-14. Hence, with the lesser number of cosmic rays striking the atmosphere per second, a smaller rate of production of carbon-14 existed in the past. A smaller production rate of carbon-14 in the atmosphere than has previously been assumed would reduce the age of carbon-14 dates. I'm a little confused here. So that's the end of the excerpt. Can any of you weigh in on this? Let me know in the comments. It says, so earlier on this page it says, but repeated and reliable tests have proven that carbon-14 is still building, something that can only be explained by a massive shakeup of the atmosphere within this time frame. But then it goes on to say, the non-equilibrium factor was so significant in carbon-14 dating that it reduces the computed age by an amount dependent upon the age of the sample by amounts increasing in time from about 20%. So it increased 20% in 1,000 years, 30% in 4,000 years, and finally so I guess like the more that carbon-14 was in the atmosphere, then that would mean that the magnetic shield was protecting it from releasing, and so we have less carbon-14 today. I think that's what it's saying. Because Dr. Thomas Barnes says, hence with the lesser number of cosmic rays striking the atmosphere per second, a smaller rate of production of carbon-14 existed in the past. But more of it was there, wasn't it? A smaller production rate of carbon-14 in the atmosphere than has previously been assumed would reduce the age of carbon-14 dates. I'm really not understanding this. If anybody can weigh in the comments, that'd be helpful. So there's more carbon-14 in our atmosphere today because of the weaker magnetic shield? Is that what I'm coming to understand here? It's just the Dr. Melvin Cook thing, it butts heads with both of these concepts. Non-equilibrium is so significant in carbon-14 dating that it reduces the computed age by an amount dependent upon the age of the sample by amounts increasing in time from about 20% in 1,000 years. So it's increasing the further back it goes. So it's less today. But then it says a smaller rate of production of carbon-14 existed in the past. These two people are conflicting ideas here. So the magnetic field has reduced over time to the present. But it's saying that it increases the further back we go. That doesn't make any sense. Anyone in the comments tell me what this means. Because I don't understand that. I'm going to move on. And commenting on Dr. Cook's time period of 12,500 years ago, Dr. Barnes adds, quote, when the effect of the larger magnetic field in the past and the consequent lesser rate of production of carbon-14 is included, these ages will be telescoped still further. This is basically saying it's all wrong. Carbon-14 is not reliable in the dating process. This lesser date would be within the last 7,000 years. This time frame now becomes oddly coincidental with those applied by our earliest legends to a cataclysmic flood wiping out a previous civilization. This time period, furthermore, has been considerably strengthened by quite fascinating discoveries made only recently, again in sedimentary deposits. Among these, the case of, quote, radio halos, unquote, in coalified logs deeply buried in the Colorado Plateau is cause for comment for a number of interesting reasons. First, they have been found in logs across a wide part of the plateau. Second, the sediments here are rich in uranium, one of the isotopes in the radioactive decay chain of uranium to lead, was found to have leached quickly into the logs. This isotope, polonium-210, has a radioactive decay life of only around 4 years. This decay, as with other isotopes, shoots an identifiable halo, or concentric shadow or ring, rippling out from its core into whatever substance it is lodged in. In the case of polonium-210, only one concentric ring is emitted during decay. The polonium-210 halos in the logs show that the core is surrounded by both an elliptic and a concentric halo, indicating that the logs were quickly buried under enough weight to compress them, and thus also the initial halo emitted by the decay. Furthermore, after this compression, there was still enough time in polonium-210's radioactive decay life to form another halo, this time one that remained concentric. This discovery indicates that the huge Colorado Plateau was created quickly by flood. In doing so, the flood buried part of an antediluvian forest with a load of sediment sufficient to compress the logs before the radioactive decay life of polonium-210 and its ability to create another halo was finished. That is, under 4 years' time. The ratio of uranium to lead, roughly 64,000 times, is the same sample in the same samples, indicates this happened only 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. And then we have an image here. It says, a radio halo of polonium-210. Examination of the cores of uranium halos in the same wood discovered a large amount of uranium-238, but almost no lead-206, and a ratio of up to 64,000, indicating all deposits were only 5,000 to 7,000 years old. Uniformitarianism adherents attempted to date these deposits as 35 million to 245 million years old, unaware of the precise work on radio halos done by Dr. Robert Gentry. Yeah, well, because it was done recently. As recently as 20 years ago. So I guess what it's saying is the first decay and then the second decay, both were captured, and that the decay has an average of 4 years, so they're plotting this out to a 4-year cataclysm event. Now that I can understand. Alright, thank you Gian J for commenting. He says, no, that's conflicting. Yeah, it makes no sense. And this is on page 157 if anyone has the book. I'll reread that last page one more time so that we can get clarification here. Study of the atmosphere adds an unexpected dimension to all of this, as well as confirming a date for within the span of intelligent mankind. The isotope carbon-14 should have achieved equilibrium in the atmosphere within 30,000 years. That is, the amount entering the atmosphere from the Earth is equal to the amount exiting into space, thus causing a steady level in the atmosphere. But repeated and reliable tests have proven that carbon-14 is still building. So there's more of it here. Something that can only be explained by a massive shakeup of the atmosphere within this time frame. Within 30,000 years? Dr. Melvin Cook of the University of Utah undertook a further study of the non-equilibrium factor. He discovered that this non-equilibrium was so significant in carbon-14 dating that it, quote, reduces the computed age by an amount dependent upon the age of the sample, by amounts increasing in time from about 20% in 1,000 years, 30% in 4,000 years, and finally telescoping all of the very long ages to 12,500 years or less. End quote. Though this method brings a plausible global event sufficient to upset the atmosphere closer to the known era of intelligent man, the Earth's magnetic field may help in narrowing this event down to a more precise period. For the last 150 years, the magnetic field has steadily declined by about 6%. Dr. Thomas Barnes of the University of Texas, El Paso, who has devoted much of his life to studying it, explains, from the aspect of its decline, its significance. And here's the explanation. The consequences of the stronger magnetic field in the past was better shielding of the Earth and its atmosphere from primary cosmic rays. This also reduced the rate of production of carbon-14 in the atmosphere. Primary cosmic rays interact with the atmosphere to produce neutrons, which in turn transmute nitrogen atoms into carbon-14. Hence, with the lesser number of cosmic rays striking the atmosphere per second, the smaller rate of production of carbon-14 existed in the past. A smaller production rate of carbon-14 in the atmosphere has previously been assumed would reduce the age of carbon-14 dates. But they're saying that the carbon-14 increases 20% in 1,000 years, 30% in 4,000 years, and finally telescoping all the very long ages to 12,500 years or less, and it doesn't give a percentage. So it would be backwards. They're talking back and forth. They're saying that the magnetic field was stronger and less cosmic rays were hitting, and so there was less carbon-14 in the past. But this other guy's saying that more carbon-14 makes things older. That doesn't make any sense. So I guess Thomas Barnes was saying that it actually flips that theory. Of Dr. Melvin Cook. So Dr. Thomas Barnes is saying Dr. Melvin Cook's observation is reverse. I'll leave it at that. So I just reread an entire page. I rarely do this on this series. Perhaps... Okay, so I'm going back to page 159, so this is 2 pages later. man. We're getting close to the 2-hour mark. Perhaps some of the most conclusive evidence for a recent massive flood is the existence of fossil fuels. In other words, the byproducts of the flesh of marine invertebrates, animals, dinosaurs, and presumably, in this view, people, billions and billions of each. And we're at the understanding that it's not fossil fuels. It's the shoal of the earth. It's like constantly being regenerated. There's no lack of it. Laboratory conversion of organic material or garbage into hydrocarbons and then into petroleum has aided in the destruction of the old uniformitarian paradigm of oil formation. Good. A hands-on demonstration showed that it was more a matter of temperature and pressure than time. In 20 minutes, oil was produced. It is tempting to think that oil proves the existence of a flood, since oil is not formed naturally otherwise. Huge, quote, seas, end quote, of vertebrates are not deposited daily into many square miles, packed over with enough water-laid rocks so that the pressure of such a mass and the heat of the decomposing flesh can produce the vast beds of oil we have beneath us today. As a matter of interest, most oil is in the Middle East, where biblical and legendary sources say civilization was concentrated before a flood. Not only is the hypothetical chronology of uniformitarianism lacking in geologic studies, radiometric dating of rocks in an attempt to justify this chronology has come under serious criticism by modern neo-catastrophist geologists. No matter what results are obtained, if they do not match the hypothetical age applied to the strata by the geological column concept of slow Lyellian development, they are thrown out in favor of uniformitarian assumptions. This has proven embarrassing when this method was used unknowingly on rock formations known to be recent. Dates like 22 million years were announced for the 200-year-old subsurface Kilauea flow in Hawaii. Potassium-argon tests yielded ages from 160 million to 3 billion years for the 1801 Hualalai flow, also in Hawaii, while 23-year-old Mount St. Helens flow in Washington State in 1980 has already been accorded ages in excess of millions of years. There you go. Despite these and other discoveries, there are still adherents of uniformitarianism who seek to deny or explain away, often feebly, their existence. Often there is a certain amount of success in this, since some institutions or some textbook orthodoxy still adheres to this philosophy. They also invoke the progress theory, another Victorian uniformitarian concept dominant in the West, which states that progress is also a steady and natural climb to the present, and that therefore ancient man had no choice but to be primitive. Yeah. Taken to its logical conclusion, one cannot believe anything written down or passed on by ancient man, because it is not history but primitive exaggeration. Jeez. Only our written records are history, and only our experiences are facts. Yeah, it's pretty arrogant, isn't it? Yet according to the tenets of this theory, mankind has existed with a similar degree of intelligence, as today for tens of thousands of years. We are so used to the millions of years of uniformitarian ideology, we forget how long 1,000 years really is, and yet, paradoxically, how short a period the last 5,000 years of human history is, compared with the potential it could and should have had. I gotta cue up more music here. We just ran through all that. Alright. Any assertion that there could have been an advanced global civilization in prehistory is usually greeted with derision because no cause for its utter destruction could be conceived by uniformitarian methods. Nevertheless, the proof of the disasters ancient records repeatedly describe continues to be discovered in spite of uniformitarianism's philosophical denials. Many of these discoveries support the proposition that the splitting asunder of the, quote, megacontinent, end quote, happened in the 4th millennium BC. This proposition, found again in the massive buckling of flood sediments, is corroborated by the chronology of ancient legends, for they speak of a great flood first, and then they speak of a great destruction of civilization thousands of years later by division and splitting of the earth just before the dawn of our own histories. We know that the 4th millennium BC is the most puzzling point in the history of mankind. In the late part of this millennium, around 3100 BC, a mere 5,000 years ago, our history suddenly begins with the complex written language of Sumerian, recording business and legal transactions, religious incantations, and legends of the many city-states of southern Mesopotamia. Around the same time, the culture of Egypt begins, as well as the unknown culture of the Indus Valley at the gateway to the Asian subcontinent. The Mayan calendar of Mexico and Central America is so precise, its beginning date can be calculated as co-equal with our date of 3114 BC. Besides the legends about the destruction of a great civilization that had existed before them, each year all these cultures also celebrated festivals of renewal or of the dead, recalling some past horrific event that the Egyptians even located as being centered in the Western Ocean or the Atlantic. Traces of a prehistoric single language have been suggested by the finding of a form of early Sanskrit in South America. Vicente Lopez, a 19th century French scholar, discovered that the earliest peoples of South America included Indo-Aryans and that their leaders used Ayar, that's spelled A-Y-A-R, prefixed before their names, identical to Sanskrit Ajar, or A-R, spelled A-J-A-R. Quote, chieftain, end quote. The 4 original, quote, leaders, end quote, of this people may symbolically reflect an entire culture set on the move after a calamity. Lopez notes their names were Ayar-Mankatopa. That's spelled M-A-N-C-O-T-O-P-A. Ayar-Chaki. Ayar-Chaki. And that's spelled C-H-A-K-I. Ayar-Aussi. A-U-S-S-I. And Ayar Uyissu, spelled Uyissu, meaning in Sanskrit, quote, believers, wanderers, soldiers, husbandmen, end quote. A caste system not unlike the old world's earliest societies, but in this case trying to rebuild in South America. Aside from alluding to a single language civilization preceding ours, biblical texts place a significant event as occurring during the same epoch. In the genealogical recital in Genesis 10:25, it is written, quote, and to Eber were born two sons, or Eber, I'm not sure how you pronounce. The name of one, Peleg, spelled P-E-L-E-G, because in his days the earth was divided. End quote. I need to take another pause here. The biblical reference has traditionally been interpreted by the clergy as referring to nations, despite the fact that the Hebrew word eretz, spelled E-R-E-T-Z, and the Greek word and the Septuagint, Gaian, spelled G-A-I-E-N, mean the ground or earth, and not Goyim, G-O-Y-I-M, or ethnos, E-T-H-N-O-S, or phyla, P-H-Y-L-A, which respectively refer to nations and tribes in Hebrew and Greek. But the word Peleg means earthquake, a name that would not be relevant to a mere scattering of tribes. According to the chronology of some biblical scholars, such as Dr. Merrill F. Unger, Eber's lifespan would coincide with about 3,500 to 3,100 BC. The candidacy of the 4th millennium BC for the age of the splitting of, quote, megacontinent, end quote, is gaining ground from some other unusual developments. The most remarkable are from uniformitarian methods, no less. This evidence once again involves the rate of sedimentation. Over the last 100 years, a careful study of the rate of sedimentation at river mouths reveal all river deltas in the world only to be 4,000 to 5,000 years old, suggesting the creation of all rivers about that long ago. This can be explained if the continents split and underwent tectonic movement with cliff and shoreline transformations. Either old rivers were rerouted and formed new deltas in their present locations, or new rivers created from the upset of juvenile sources flowed to the sea for the first time. Another clue is found in the uniformitarianism's neat time periods for dating the Earth's geological strata. Even if we were to take these as accurate, it is worthy to note that the fracture zone between the continents, and in parentheses it says that is where the continents can be placed back together like pieces of a puzzle, end parentheses, most apparent between Western Africa and Eastern, North, and South America, goes up directly between all, quote, time periods, unquote, of the uniformitarian geologic column, from the most ancient to the most recent, indicating a split for the continents within the Holocene epoch in the last 10,000 years. It has been suggested by a number of catastrophists that the ending of the Ice Age may have started with this event. As the continents suddenly moved over the seabed They pushed land into new temperature zones and possibly caused the Earth to lose its balance and go off-kilter, perhaps by as much as 26 degrees until it regained some of its balance and evened out at its present 23.5 degree inclination. Major shifts of land and sea are evident on the continental shelves, which show signs of cliff erosion from the surf, though now hundreds of feet below the present surface. The deep underwater beaches at the Azores could have been created only by the prolonged pounding action of the surf on the shoreline. Corings on the continental shelves have bored into fossil graveyards of land animals, and the retrieval of ancient man-made tools in the same area indicates habitation when the shelves, now deep below the surface, were once above. Vast and deep subsurface ocean changes in relatively recent times are also indicated by the rippling of bottom sands on seamounts and even on the deep ocean bottom, something unexpected in the uniformitarian model of perpetually calm ocean depths for 200 million years. Concerning this discovery, Dr. Edwin L. Hamilton, who studied the phenomena closely, describes the unexpected find as seen in the Pacific. Quote, "A feature of immediate interest was the fact that ripple marks, long considered evidence of shallow water deposition by land geologists, were found in the deep sea. Two remarkable photographs taken on top of the Sylvania Seamount in the Marshall Islands area established the fact that the soft Globigerina ooze," and that's spelled Globigerina, "between the manganese-coated boulders was definitely rippled." End quote. Further deep-sea expeditions by the Navy Electronics Laboratory have extended the surprising discoveries even farther down. Hamilton comments that, quote, "well-defined ripple marks down to a depth of about 6,000 feet, end quote, have been found. Corings and retrievals of igneous rocks, such as granites and basalts in the Atlantic's soft, therefore presumably young seabed, have found counterparts to the great beds of lava on land, like the Deccan Traps in India and the Colombian Plateau. The only explanation seems to be the same event, massive continental movement. When the 4th millennium BC again arises in the computations of the Earth's magnetic field, or then the 4th millennium BC again arises in computations of the Earth's magnetic field, we again find that its disturbing decline indicates the Earth was jolted relatively recently. If this decline, in parentheses 6% in the last 150 years, end parentheses, was extrapolated backwards linearly, as is the standard in uniformitarian reasoning, only 7,000 years ago the Earth would have had a magnetic field the strength of a magnetic star, which this Earth could never have supported. Yeah, that's saying... So, the uniformitarian concept is the thing that I was struggling with then, right? Because if you say that it's a constant 6% extrapolated linearly backward, yeah, that makes a little more sense now. So the part that I was struggling to understand was the uniformitarian concept, because it makes no fucking sense. This would suggest that the Earth had a rather steady conductor generating its magnetic field until recent history, when something upset the globe, such as a tilt of the Earth on its axis, sufficient to disturb its rotational core, and hence to disturb the generation of the magnetic field. Former exemplars of uniformitarianism are now seen to point directly to the fourth millennium. Strongholds such as the Grand Canyon were dashed by the discovery in our generation that the headwaters of the Colorado River, which uniformitarianism proposed slowly etched out the canyon over eons of time, are actually at a lower altitude than the plateau through which the Grand Canyon is cut. Since water does not run uphill, the old theory was junked in favor of a breach that would have cut the canyon quickly, as an inland sea. In parentheses, apparently the one that covered large parts of the American Southwest, end parentheses, emptied through it. From the recent estimates of how fast Niagara Falls recedes, a rate no earlier than perhaps only the 4th millennium BC can be offered. But so far nothing can be offered in uniformitarian ideology to explain what jolted the American continent enough to split open a canyon in the southwest and drop or uplift parts of the strata near Canada. Quote, apparent age, end quote, is often a deceptive excuse to claim that identical geologic features can look different in age. Following the titanic eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980, almost every geologic feature of, quote, extreme old uniformitarian age, end quote, on Earth had been created. So almost every geologic feature of extreme old uniformitarian age on Earth had been created, only on a much smaller scale. Heat winds laid down a 60-foot ridge of sediment, a, quote, gravity collapse, end quote, of land, created a valley with extreme weathering around its lip, and a mud breach created a 1/5 scale, quote, Grand Canyon, end quote, and then diverted a creek to flow down its center, much as the Colorado does in the Grand Canyon today. Spirit Lake sloshed back and forth so violently against the sides of the mountain that huge tidal waves created cliffs looking, quote, thousands of years old, end quote, overnight. Hey, Jason H., good to see you here. Yeah, you're late. You're late to class, Jason. Don't let it happen again, you hear me? At the same time, the blast of the volcano ripped more than 1 million trees out of the forest and threw them into the lake. Over time, these floating logs rubbed all their bark off against each other and, becoming waterlogged, sank to the bottom root end, the heaviest end, first, to become embedded in the rising sediment, there to sit as a dead forest. Precisely what is seen in vast ridges of sediment like Petrified Ridge in the Dakotas, where fossilized trees, denuded of their bark and with only 3-foot long roots, as in Spirit Lake, are buried as great dead forests. But by the size of these dead forests, they indicate floods and upheaval on a global or continent-wide level. The downsizing of carbon-14 dates has turned the tables on our view of the slow ascent of mankind's civilization from Mesolithic foragers to Neolithic stone workers to Bronze Age artificers. Probably as the dates continue to be compressed, these time periods will be eradicated altogether. In their place, carbon-14 has indicated a cataclysm for which dating beyond seems barred by the extent it so changed the isotope ratios upon which our current dating methods rely. Yeah, no shit. Catastrophist ideologies are causing the abandonment of dating any object merely by its depth in sediment. Good. Petrification of relatively modern implements such as bags of flour in Arkansas, a derby hat from a mine in New Zealand, and an entire water wheel in Australia has erased the whole concept of, quote, apparent age, end quote. Without this philosophical dating chronology, the foundation of our timetables disappears into a world of contradictory artifacts as ambiguous interpretations of whether one is older, co-equal, or even later than another. The ability to spread agriculturally and organizationally over one megacontinent would require a high level of science and technology to remain linked and cohesive. Therefore, it is unavoidable to consider the existence over the whole world of unknown ruins as further evidence that a great civilization preceded our own time. Yeah, look at all the pyramids that are around the world, some with no tops. They contain within them more than just the arguable paradoxes of small artifacts, but the undeniable fact that they all seem designed by the same collective science. Their stones are enormous in size, intricate in their cutting, mysterious in their method of hauling and arrangement, by harmonics perhaps, and resemble each other from as far as Peru to Malta, Britain, and even Africa. Today we classify them as, quote, cyclopean, end quote, because of the colossal size of the blocks used. The greatest paradox, for they surpass anything our engineering can achieve today. Yet they are so old, not even our most ancient cultures knew who built them. And in parentheses it says, aside from, quote, gods, end quote, that is, and end parentheses. We're almost wrapped up here. This is a fun chapter. Many of these megaliths, from the Mediterranean to Canada, had been arranged into crude hinges, or, quote, wheels, end quote, almost all of which seem to incorporate into their key angles, astronomical alignments to specific stars. The principal alignments are with the passages of the equinox, solstices, and other seasonal indicators. The plurality of such sites would seem to indicate the widespread need for a new calendar, one perhaps necessitated by the cataclysm mentioned above. After a devastating continental upheaval, the entire heavens would be altered. And in parentheses it says, from our perspective, end parentheses. And the beginning and ending of new seasons would need marking. However, it is true that primitive, though accurate enough astronomical calculations and computations of heavenly bodies and their movements and risings could have been derived from placing tree trunks in appropriate places to mark stars on the horizon. And in parentheses, as the Egyptians did. End parentheses. The use of such huge monoliths of a size that even our own modern cranes cannot lift suggests a science and engineering beyond even our own. Yes, one that Edley Skolnick knows, or knew. But the crudeness in the cutting of the blocks indicates expedience and a culture on the wane. One that soon disappeared to leave what was left of their science and engineering a mystery to later peoples. As far as anybody can tell, the oldest appear to date to about the late 4th millennium, circa 3100 BC. Another echo of the time of, quote, Peleg, end quote, and prehistory. It stands to reason that if these represent early rebuildings after a cataclysm, most of those found underwater, having been covered by rising ocean levels over the centuries following, might be even older and might be some of the most fantastic and intact ruins anywhere, since they would have been spared the ravages and quarrying by successive cultures on land. It is in the Bermuda Triangle, on the Bahama Banks, where just such an idea is being proved with each successful dive. Discoveries here even include some elaborate tiled floors deep beneath the bottom sands. Details of prehistoric civilization not found anywhere on land. If all the observed geometric patterns prove to be man-made, then the shallow Great Bahama Bank actually becomes the most extensive prehistoric site left on Earth, on the scale of a vast city. Already, the downsizing of carbon-14 has revealed a clue to this lost civilization and the triangle. The Bimini stones have been previously dated to 12,000 years ago by testing the mangrove roots that had overgrown some. Overgrowth would obviously imply abandonment. This time period was co-equal to the date for the ending of the last so-called glaciation of the Earth. However, the downsizing of dates now places both events in the 3rd to 2nd millennium BC, proving the intriguing prospect that the Bahamas are indeed the last part of the former remnant of one great continent, broken in the 4th millennium BC to succumb slowly to the sea. Other underwater discoveries are even greater gargantuan stones have been turning up on both sides of the Atlantic to very much impress upon the observer a culture torn in half. These stones seem to reflect a later retrogression, not only because they appear older, but also because of the precision in their matched sizes and exact square cutting. For 9 miles, a cyclopean stone wall runs along the continental shelf off Morocco, with some individual stones as high as 2 stories, while some similar walls or roads have been traced by aerial survey off the coast of South America. Other immense stone constructions exist underwater off Spain, Portugal, and the Yucatan. At Baalbek in Lebanon, archaeologists, in their investigation of the ancient site, have established a veritable timetable of human architectural evolution, from the present to the past. Tumbled or cast about from wars and quarrying are the square stones of Turkish mosques of the Renaissance period. Then even older are the massive amounts of the small mud kiln-baked bricks of medieval and Saracen Arab dwellings, and that's spelled Saracen. Even older still are the Byzantine rectangles of Justinian's time, the 6th century AD. Even grander and older are the monumental blocks and columns of the Roman imperial period. Still older are the great stones of the Antonosian Syria of the Hellenistic age. Still older are the Phoenician stonework and sarcophagi of the age of Hiram, 950 BC. Then older still are primitive Canaanite constructions in the sun-dried bricks from 2000 BC. And then there are the oldest of them all, colossal stones of 1,200 tons, the largest and the heaviest worked stones on Earth, arranged neatly to form a foundation so huge, the purpose of which no one can conceive. And upon the length of only 3 of its blocks, a huge classical Roman temple was later built and is still partially standing. Nearby lies the largest stone worked by man, a gigantic rectangle measuring 68 by 15 by 15 feet, weighing 1,400 tons. It lies strangely prostrate near the remains of others, toppled by some unknown prehistoric event. Tales of lands sinking and disappearing to the west, in parentheses, as recorded by those indigenous peoples nearer Europe and Africa, end parentheses, and memories of a homeland to the east across the sea, in parentheses, as remembered and passed on by Amerindian peoples, end parentheses, were still in existence by the time the Spanish sailed across the Atlantic, but never associated, of course, with recalling perhaps the same prehistoric event. A vague remembrance of the opposite continents as they split and moved over the horizon, and a vague remembrance of a homeland fractured. These native Atlantic legends have often been used as proof of a vague recollection of an Atlantean continent sinking, as in Plato's tale or Edgar Cayce's trances. It has been pointed out by critics of Atlantis, however, that when all the continents are moved back into their theoretical places in a megacontinent, there is no leftover land mass large enough to be accorded to the Atlantean continent or island first spoken of by Plato. This is also true of the legends of Lemuria or Mu, M-U, a vanished paradise land in the Pacific, but the questions could be asked. Quote, was the megacontinent Atlantis? End quote. Quote, was it Lemuria? End quote. Do the legends borrowed and tailored, though they may be, refer to this lost civilization on a single continent? Was its type of destruction confused with its, quote, name? End quote. It is interesting to note that in Sanskrit, one of the earliest languages on Earth, traces of which are found even in South America, the word meaning great cataclysm is Atyantica, spelled Atyantica. Atyantica. Did the Atlantic receive its name from the earliest languages of mankind? Not from the Greek legend of Atlas, son of Zeus, but from great disasters that were at the heart of the earth and destroyed that one culture? A consideration of this over the next chapters may explain how the ruins beneath the triangle's jade waters could hold the last clue to a fantastic civilization of the past, and the most fantastic clue to the current riddle of the Bermuda Triangle. And with that, we finish chapter 7. For the next week, chapter 8. Atyantica. We are going to talk about the Sanskrit continent. So I hope you all enjoyed that today. Again, for those watching after the fact, please like and comment, share your thoughts. This is an open forum here. Like, you're not gonna get beat up by me. I promise you. Don't worry about not sounding correct. Because we're all learning and discovering new things here, okay? But next week's chapter is 20 pages. And we will continue this on Thursday. So this was another special midweek show. And if anything changes, I'll let you know in the posts. So the channel posts, I've been using those and it seems to get seen by those of you. So I appreciate that you like it, because then I know that you see it. So any other updates to the channel, I will give in post form. And we have our show on Sunday for Let's Talk. We will continue that series then. But that'll do it for today. We're almost done with the book. One of many. This series is gonna run on for a long time. This ain't the end of it. Zenray made a joke the other day. He said I should call these series the deepest dives, because who else is going this deep into these questions? I challenge you to find another channel doing this with this amount of detail. Alright? And it can get boring for most of the people who have short attention spans. And you know what? That's okay. You can come find me when you're ready. If you're already here, welcome. And stay along for the ride, because we're going to be finding out new information as we go on here. But until next time, take care of yourselves. And until the next one, class dismissed.